A heartfelt welcome to all of you. 245 with Head Biotech.
And to the international audience, I welcome you as well to 45 with Head Biotech.
So back to Norwegian. Norwegian is a much easier language when I'm going to discuss these what I would call fairly complex questions and topics. Then it's very tiring to sit and think about English words and grammar at the same time. So I've decided that I speak Norwegian and instead rely on a so-called high-quality translation show. Yes, and I also have to remind all new viewers that if you're unsure what this is about, then watch the pilot episode, which lasts about an hour. There I build up all the details from the very beginning about what this is really about. It's about the Artemis program that SpaceX and NASA are leading. And as we mentioned last time, the Chinese and the Russians are also on their way, but they seem to be a bit more frugal with sharing their plans with the outside world, it appears. But anyway, the podcast is about us trying to become a multi-planetary species, and especially Elon Musk, whom I just have to give a little credit to. He has truly been a pioneer on Earth regarding this. And I don't think we should be ashamed of Elon Musk. One can always complain that he has a lot of power, but it seems to me that he still has fairly honest intentions. He is a craftsman and stay focused, because it could probably have been much worse in my opinion. And like everyone else, Musk should also have the right to participate in the struggle for existence and have his own strategies for it. That applies to Elon Musk too. But as was brought up last time, the fact that Elon waited a bit before admitting that SpaceX now have to capture the moon before they can capture Mars, because I've always thought, shouldn't you have realized that earlier? And if anyone realizes things before others, it's Elon Musk. Those small details of curves, but overall I would say that Elon Musk has contributed a lot to us, and he is good at bringing up the Fermi paradox, because he has a point right. Maybe we should soon all sit down and think. We are humans on a planet in the cosmos. We can continue to wage war and argue afterwards, but that we try to get into the mode more often. Hey folks, we are completely alone here in the cosmos. Should we try to preserve the consciousness? Preserve the consciousness that nature has spent over 4 billion years on Earth developing. So that's where I think Elon Musk has been good, and I want to ride that Elon Musk wave, you could say, without mixing in any politics now. But this episode will be a bit of an uncomfortable episode. I think in the future I will call this broadcast the uncomfortable episode in the whole series. I don't know how many episodes there will be, but I will at least cover the Artemis 2 trip around the moon. But it actually feels quite grotesque to cover the Artemis 2 launch when almost I hope a little, because the purpose of the podcast is after all to confirm the NASA curse. But there are actually 4 people on that rocket, and it's such a dilemma, very big dilemma. But I try to explain the dilemma in the pilot episode. I also say that, according to the theory, the Paradise Machine model, these astronauts are good and brave. I myself would not have dared to sit in that Artemis 2 rocket there. I barely dare to sit in a passenger plane. So getting into that enormous rocket that is also going to travel behind the moon, that is brave. So at the same time, we must cross our fingers that it goes well. But at the same time, I have to admit that the purpose of the podcast, yes, I explained that in the pilot episode, so I don't need to go into more detail about it. Regarding the quality of this broadcast, it has become a bit better now since last time. I've adjusted the camera a little and sorted out the studio. This is probably roughly how the studio will look in the future. And I'm going to skip the news today because this episode comes so close after the previous episode. I just want to get finished with the Jack Parsons and these gruesome topics, and also be finished with the so-called, the world's most evil man, Aleister Crowley, because I noticed that when I immersed myself in these things, I come across topics that are not something I'm interested in spending more time on, because I notice that I almost get a little scared. It has to do with the fact that I believe in the paradise machine model. And when I see that what they were thinking follows much the same patterns, I also believe them a little. I think the two of them were somewhat brave, perhaps, being pioneers and so on. I'm not actually afraid, right? But I'm just not interested in living in that occult world any longer than strictly necessary. It's now about 4 days or something since I came across Jack, or maybe a week since I first saw a picture of him. When I started researching NASA, Jack appeared very quickly in the search results. But now I have read a lot more about Parsons and Crowley, so now I understand much more of the situation. So I've adjusted my view since the last episode, because last time I almost praised Jack Parsons to the skies. But now I've become a little afraid of him. I've become a little afraid of him, Jack, I must say. He is hugely, hugely, hugely smart. One of the smartest out there. And even though it was Aleister Crowley, the so-called world's most evil man who started the Thelema cult or sect, they were actually called Thelemites. However, now I know the story behind the cult much better than last time in episode 1. First of all, it's Aleister Crowley who first received a message from a demon. Some say it's wrong to call it a demon, but it's quite clear. Just look at the outfits of Jack and his wife in the picture here. You can see with your own eyes that this is not a pleasant sect. It's not very pleasant what they're talking about either. In this picture, for example, Parsons means that he has fetched his wife called Babalon from the spirit world, that she is from behind the abyss, which is a terrible place, and that's where she's supposed to be from. That much says it all about which side this sect was on when it comes to evil versus good. She, Babalon, has the power to choose who gets to pass behind the abyss. It's her in the picture, the demon woman called Babalon. I call her a demon woman, but I know not everyone agrees with using the word demon. But in relation to the paradise women in the approach theory, I think perhaps this is supposed to be classified as a demon woman, in relation to the paradise woman that is, which is the Fermi life forms in the approach theory. It doesn't seem like they belong together, you could say. So I just want to try to finish with this now, really. And the most incredible thing I have experienced was yesterday. After that, I thought, I'm not interested in investigating this matter any further. Yesterday, I actually listened to the book of the Law by Crowley, their Bible, you might say. The book Aleister Crowley received from the voice of the demon. I call it demon, okay, from which Crowley received the content of this book. Eventually, Crowley left England and went to the USA. In USA, Jack Parsons comes and visits one of Crowley's Thelemite meetings. After the meeting, Parsons becomes very interested in the Thelema sect. Eventually, Parsons starts getting into the woman's stuff, and what is so scary is, when I listened through the book yesterday, remember that this book is supposed to be directly from this demon to Crowley in 1904. The book first talks a lot about things that remind me very much of the content in the Paradise Machine model. For example, that they come from stars, like in black holes, since stars basically is black holes, right? And that everyone has their own star, almost like everyone shall have their own paradise, right? And then comes that sentence a few minutes into the book. The sentence I posted on X last night, the message from the demon to Crowley. Remember, this was in 1904. The demon in the book say many incoherent things without any clear connection. But then comes the sentence where the demon says, solve the first part of the formula, but keep the second part of the formula separate from the first part. In other words, do not combine the two formula parts into one single formula. So the demon said to Crowley, do not put the two parts of the formula together. Keep them apart, and those of you who have read the Paradise Woman story from 2006, the night I arrived at TU equals 0 equals paradise. It started with me first writing down EU equals 0, which is the second law of thermodynamics. About 12 hours after I came home from the library. Remember, this is 20 years ago. But first, after about 12 hours of work, I wrote down EU equals 0. Then I continued working for about 30 more hours before I attached the expression equals paradise to the first part, EU equals 0. This connection to make the complete EU equals 0 equals paradise formula happened towards the very end before the Paradise women took me with them to their paradise. That was also when the tornado stopped, and I throw the apple at the wall as shown in the intro video. Everything came loose when the formula became complete. Suddenly, I was no longer afraid of the tornado. That's why I went out and got an apple from the kitchen, because then I could eat after almost 48 hours without food. So I throw that apple at the wall in pure relief after the formula was finished. If you look at the intro video, that's why that image of those red apple pieces is so important. It's from the moment the EU equals 0 equals paradise formula was completed, which is the foundation of the fourth law of thermodynamics. So, the apple pieces from the intro video are from that night in January 2006. After the expression equals paradise was added to the first part, I wrote down many hours earlier, EU equals 0, which then stopped the tornado. And after that, the Paradise women came. After I closed my eyes to sleep, then the sole group of Paradise women came to the bed, and they took me into the tunnel which eventually led us out into their Paradise village. It's in that village. They tell me everything for about 20 minutes. The picture from the intro video of the Paradise women sitting by the lake with their babies. That is from that dream after I completed the formula EU equals 0 equals paradise. So if the demon said this to Aleister Crowley for over 120 years ago in 1904, because it was actually correct that when the last part of the EU equals 0 equals paradise formula was attached to the first part, it sort of opened the portal to the paradise state as I see it now, when they started their approach toward Earth, perhaps. It happened when the second part of the paradise formula was added to the first. That's when everything started. That was when the tornado stopped and it became just an enormous, delicious rush of happiness. So I took that apple in pure excitement and threw it into the wall. I became so happy that it was over after the formula was completed because the tornado stopped. I was so tired but managed to take the apple in my hand and threw it into the wall and fell onto the bed. Remember, I had now worked perhaps 48 hours non-stop with the formula, with no sleep or food. Then, after falling to the bed, I closed my eyes. That is when the paradise women came over to the bed. But I always thought later, since 2006, that the paradise women experience were all hallucinations, right? I have always thought that. For about 20 years I have thought that the paradise women were just hallucinations, even though it felt real. I kept the formula as I now had it down on paper and started writing articles based on that idea the next 18 years. However, it was only in 2024 when I arrived at the woman-baby idea while writing on the Paradise Machine model paper that all the pieces fell into place with that experience from 18 years earlier. Things fell into place with both the interstellar object 1I Oumuamua and the so-called Paradise Women from 2006. Just that now those Paradise Women became the Fermi life forms in Fermi's paradox. The woman-baby idea, as described in the pilot episode, really triggered the vision of the approach theory in 2024. I later read that after about 48 hours without sleep and food, the human brain starts to hallucinate. And that's such an experience from 2006. It can feel very real. So it wasn't something I spent much time on after 2006, but wrote down the Paradise Women story in 2014 just to be safe. Since, around that time, the theory, now called the fourth law of thermodynamics, started to get some momentum, I saw that the theory could be valid. But after the 2024 paper, I started thinking, wow, what if the Paradise Women was real? That's why I now think more like there is maybe a 30% chance that the dream was true. Then 3I Atlas came and confirmed the approach theory. And these other things, like the NASA curse that have happened recently, as also described in mini article 1 and 2. If something should also happen with Artemis II, a fourth incident, and further confirm the NASA curse since the first in December 6, 2025, then I think we really have to start to wake up. At least I document the development with Massa Mao with this podcast. When someone are much smarter, then it's just natural that they want to remove the chaos. When I started reading more about Jack, after I got more detailed information about things he said and so on, Then I started to understand, okay, he was one of those I fear the most. These smart guys who sit on all the knowledge and are very tactical and know a lot about how the brain works. And with Stasi and globalism, that was probably something Jack was a supporter of. But remember that these people were active in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. Jack Parsons was just the forerunner. It was before the hippies and this modern left movement really started in late 60s and 70s when it really took off. But I see that in connection with the increasing abundance of energy. So when you get abundance of energy, then you also get the opportunity to give yourself freedom at the expense of nature's freedom. According to the fourth law of thermodynamics, that is what actually happens slowly but surely. They are actually trying to dominate nature. And eventually, they will probably manage it over time because these are really smart people. But that nature has actually been waiting for them. That's what I say with the paradise machine model, that this is a bit sad for them, because I think they should be allowed to fight the struggle for existence. They had a plan. I have revealed the plan, but that we all have a plan. But what is interesting is that I believe that nature, the machine, has been waiting for them, as I also write in the 2024 article, as if the paradise machine, or nature if you like, has been waiting for them. That's why I say that Jack Parsons and them were actually losers in a way, even though they were successful also in life in many ways. But their solution to reach paradise and give themselves freedom behind the abyss was then a wrong strategy, because nature stopped them. That's very related to the NASA curse as well. You see for yourself on Jack here in the picture, that's his wife. The demon Babalon he always tried to summon to Earth with complicated rituals. She Babalon who could take them behind the abyss, which is a horrible place. She was supposed to have read Whar or something, and then he meets her here and marries her. So he believes he succeeded. So when he sits next to his wife in this picture, he believes that she is Babalon, she who rules behind the abyss there. So you see how they are dressed. You see that this Babalon woman is not a paradise woman, not that love thing. It looks more like the strict authoritarian. We shall have freedom and we shall dominate everyone, right? And when I read more details about Jack, he had said what I mentioned. He was known for saying, when they got together a bit with these women of his Thelema sect, we shall be a few who shall dominate the many. And for them to be able to do that, they have to remove the chaos. And that goes through first having constant abundance of energy. And then they can make lots of governmental rules right. It's only after that that a few can dominate and many becomes possible. So what I feel a lot of this is about is that these very smart people, their job becomes to convince the many not as smart, to believe that it also pays off for them to remove freedom and chaos. What I mean then is that it's actually a trap. Okay, so I mentioned in the opening that Jack Parsons in the picture here, the fact that he has started to scare me a little more since the last episode. Everyone has probably seen Aleister Crowley as the commander of the Thelema sect, because he's the one who received this book in his head from this demon, so he was the natural boss of the sect. But the way I understand it now is that internally within the sect in the USA, it was Jack Parsons. He was seen as the actual commander, the most important person in the entire sect, even though it was Crowley who came into contact with the demon and wrote the book. Then I discovered that he was also a Marxist and almost a communist. He was very eager with his politics. That was something that belonged to the Thelema sect, that many of them were Marxists, and Parsons at some point lost his security clearance due to his Marxist views and contacts. And then it immediately come to the fourth law of thermodynamics, because then we're talking about high taxes to limiting natural chaos with rules, to give oneself freedom, right? Supposedly, Jack often said to the others in the sect when they gathered, "We shall be a few who shall dominate the many." But I don't think it's so strange that smart people have a tendency towards Marxism. Probably because they know they are smarter than most others, and then they are not really interested in having freedom actually. The smartest ones, they lose from having natural chaos, like in the jungle and so forth. Why should they have chaos when they are smarter than all the others? Perhaps that would be stupid of them even. So I think it's natural that they will seek to lock it all down and turn the struggle for existence game into a two-dimensional chess game. So that Marxism seemed to be an important part of their long-term plan of reaching total freedom, which was central in the Thelema sect from the very beginning. Freedom for themselves anyway. Then life becomes a much simpler game that decides the outcome in the struggle for existence game, because then they know, by removing natural chaos, they win right. That's how I see it, but I also think they should be allowed to do it right. Everyone must have their own strategy to survive. So when I then go out on a podcast like this and talk about this, I have a bit of responsibility. That I don't want to start any hate or persecution. We have to keep our feet on the ground here and remember what we are. And a little back to what Elon Musk talks about, that sometimes we take a couple of steps back and think that we are just some humans here on this earth trying to survive as best we can. Just a way of thinking. But I also think we should argue and have democracy and almost fight right. But let's just be honest. We others, we are probably not much better than the Thelemites, at least not to Parsons and Crowley and them as discussed in episode 1, since now I know a little about their thinking. The globalist stuff, I think, has triggered the zero-risk trap, which means the Fermi life forms are heading towards Earth, or the machine, if you will. What exactly lies behind the word Fermi life form is a bit hard to say right. According to the theory, they are supposed to be on the other side of the event horizon and black holes and be in a mathematical format. A world without mass and no particles, but it's supposed to be an eternal mathematical format. I talk about this in the third article from 2021, that it can be a state that exists in mathematical waves. For example, as I suggest, because waves you can use Joseph Fourier, the French mathematician. He started this with mathematical waves actually being the smallest building block to construct all possible forms in a mathematical world. So this whole studio here could have been constructed in a mathematical format just with mathematical waves, you could say. The point of my third article was that if someone then just manages to copy our thoughts into that mathematical format, that's the idea that we can enter these paradise states, being moved into these paradises that look completely fantastic. You also see in the intro video these paradises coming out of black holes on the other side of the event horizon. It's in mathematical format, eternal format. So there are these perfect places with 100% love and intelligence. And that is supposed to be the lowest energy state that exists in the whole world, you could say. And that is the paradise state. EU equals 0 equals paradise. So the way we can get there then is that these Fermi life forms or the machine in some way can copy us over to this mathematical format. Then we should be able, for example, I could sit here and have this podcast in that world too. The thing is you remove everything that is in particle form, remove all mass. It becomes just an eternally enduring mathematical format that makes everything able to be perfect, because it's in a mathematical format. But it will feel exactly like this world here. That's the theory then. What I believe then is that someone has triggered that zero-risk mechanism in nature and attracted the Fermi life form. Yes, exactly what a Fermi life form is a bit hard to say. It can just be probably they have perhaps 1,000 times higher intelligence than us. I have no idea. It's like a mosquito trying to guess what we are doing and how we are and so on. So the only thing I can say with the theory is that they are supposed to represent 100% love and intelligence. Well, his is what I write about in the approach theory, but that the reason they are coming towards Earth is that they cannot risk losing control over the machine, over paradise, when they know there is something out there that theoretically is going to send them to hell if they don't stop them. So that's why they come then. It's supposed to be a stress signal. And I already thought that in 2002, a biological principle already in 2002, which I write about in the 2024 article. I came up with the casino owner parable. I imagined that there was an ego in nature that we don't see, just like in a casino. That if someone achieves zero risk in the casino, then they start eating from taking money out of the pockets of the casino owner without being stopped, without being punished for it or stopped. And then it's just a matter of time before the casino loses the game. But what I didn't think about then, because then I only thought about live or die scenario for the casino. But what came up in the 2024 article, then this with hell came into the picture, and into this paradise machine model. And then it became a bit scary, but I had to write about it. The only thing I could assure, the only thing the machine model can assure, is that the machine shall not be strict. It shall be very soft actually, and forgive most things and so on, but just not zero-risk strategies. Someone who has achieved a successful zero-risk strategy in the struggle for existence. Because then they shall know that, okay, now we know with mathematical precision what you have intended to do, what you would have done to us if you had gotten the chance to dominate us. Then we know it. So I think it has something to do with that globalist stuff. And I realized that Jack Parsons was very active among the Marxists, and he was really one of them, and several of the Thelemites were too. So that's where I can understand that if they thinks we can just take over the earth here. Because if you are the smartest, then I assume you realize after a while that you are the smartest. Yes, now I'm not saying that everyone who is smart will, of course, not think that. I know there are a lot of people who are super smart who are probably not Marxists and so on, but there is a tendency, right? Anyway, to remove chaos would be a perfect way of giving themselves freedom in alignment with the Thelema philosophy, right? But in general, as I have written on X, it almost seems like you can trace it down into science too. When I talked about FTL signaling in the 2025 article, then it seems like I imagine a bit that you can trace it all the way down even to von Neumann and Einstein too, because these are very smart, right? It could seem that they kind of didn't want FTL signaling to be possible, because then it becomes a chaotic context to all. Then you lose control over nature in a way. For example, von Neumann, the otherwise world-class mathematician, von Neumann is known to make a rare calculation error when disproving non-local correlation. Perhaps because he deep down don't like chaos. I don't know, but I think I can see a pattern, and it is not so strange, really. But also, mentally speaking, if we humans on Earth realize that, it is possible to signal faster than the speed of light, or that there are aliens, and such things, then those who have these strategies, then they lose control in a way. Because then, too, chaos is added to the situation and you could say, remove their freedom. That is perhaps I also admire Crowley a bit, because he just said it flat out, that their goal was to give themselves total freedom. But that Parsons took it to the next level, you might say, as he seemed to bake the same ideas into Marxist and thereby globalist ideas. So I have read a bit about this and how globalism started, the way I see it then. That it was really in the 60s in East Germany, in the GDR. Then Stalin had raged for decades. Stalin was actually a socialist and Marxist too, but I would think that if he lived today he would perhaps have been categorized as a conservative. But at that time Stalin was pro-Lenin and actually a Marxist. But it may be that he was only that to gain power and so on. But officially he was that. But the other Marxists in Europe, and then in East Germany, when they saw how brutal Stalin and the KGB was, because he just killed his opponents, he just killed them without even trying to hide it almost, and arrested them and put them in labor camps. Eventually, the socialists in East Germany saw this and said, hey, this is not going to give any socialist global state because people will be afraid of us. And then they start developing this Zersitzung strategy because they thought we must use psychology. We must become experts in psychology and neuroscience. Because psychology, no one can see psychology. The idea with what they called Zersitzung is that you can actually murder people without even touching them, without using violence. That was the point. So you just have to read this yourself and go into historical documents about the Stasi period in East Germany. But I feel I have quite good coverage to claim this. And the word Zersitzung, it means to crush from within or to kill from the inside. So within the Stasi, they had very clear strategies on how they should proceed to crush a human from within without anyone noticing. So it became a secret, invisible weapon. But they could use psychology for so much else too. So in the hands of these super smart people, I think that is perhaps what has made them so skilled in the end. And if they then also get control over a state apparatus, remove chaos, and in addition have all that knowledge, and basically sit alone as a group with the knowledge about the brain, how our brains work in all possible ways, then it will be an enormous advantage if they manage to create a lie, a facade that no one sees behind, so that they can operate risk-free by also manipulating, making us think that, here everything is safe, right? My point here is, of course, that the actual situation could potentially be, oh, it's safe with the Thelemite sect around us. Using psychology like this, it's much like what Pablo Escobar did gain control, the Plata o Plumo, meaning money or lead. You can either choose to be shot, being Plumo, or you take the money, which would be Plata. It's like these two buttons, fear and safety, they can use to control a human with, if they manage to remove the chaos. It's a very effective way to manipulate a human brain. Only Pablo Escobar did it physically, and it was very, very effective. But something that is perhaps even more frightening is when you use psychology as a weapon and a state apparatus. It almost makes you start touching on these things with hell Plumo or paradise Plata, because there is no way out. They don't even intend to kill you. They can just torment you, right? Because you can't get anywhere without the chaos in nature gone. And if they are truly evil, that's when I come to these occult things. If these that came long after Jack Parsons are evil, and they still have their sect going, that they perhaps have gotten new followers after the 40s and 50s. A new group who have stayed much more hidden than Parsons and Crowley. If the Epstein case is so bad as the rumors say, it even might be this Thelema sect thing. There will probably be quite a long break now, but then a new topic will appear in episode 3. We'll see how it goes. Okay, then I thank you for today, episode number 245 with Head Biotech. Thank you for your attention.